Good evening, everybody. Welcome. Happy election night in Ontario. I'm so thrilled that all of you could come out and make it out here this evening. My name is Laurel McDonald, and I'm Associate Chief Librarian for Special Collections here in the U of T Libraries. And on behalf of the U of T Libraries, it's my great honor and great pleasure to welcome you here this evening to the 15th Annual Joanna and Leon Katz Memorial Lecture. To begin, however, I wish to acknowledge the land on which the U of T operates. For thousands of years, it's been the traditional territory of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and the Mississauga of the Credit. And today, this meeting place is home to many Indigenous and Métis people from across Turtle Island, and we're so grateful for the opportunity to work on it. So welcome, everybody, to the Joanna and Leon Katz Memorial Lecture. Many of you may have known Joanna and Leon Katz. They were both remarkable Canadian art collectors and Canadian book collectors. And from the Fisher perspective, they were also wonderful friends of the Fisher. When Leon Katz passed away in 2000 at the age of 94, he left a wonderful bequest to the Thomas Fisher Rare Book Library. And under his wife Joanna's guidance, that bequest actually established his own rare book collection, an acquisition fund for rare books and special collections, and this wonderful lecture series. And when Joanna passed away in 2014, she and Leon left us this remarkable legacy and this wonderful lecture series that we continue to this day. And so this evening, we're very honored that the 2024 Katz lecturer is Maurice Vellekoop. Maurice is an award-winning cartoonist, illustrator, and artist. He grew up in Toronto. He was born in Toronto. When he graduated from the Ontario College of Arts, after he graduated from the Ontario College of Arts in 1986, he worked for many important magazines and advertising clients. His artwork has been exhibited throughout Canada and around the world. He's written many comics and zines. And most recently, he published, we're so glad we have this time together, which is his first full-length graphic work. And it was actually the winner of the 2024 Toronto Book Awards. And it's also been shortlisted for the 2024 Libby Awards, we just found out today. So congratulations to Maurice. So this evening, Maurice will be talking to us about his life and about growing up in Toronto and giving us tidbits from his wonderful graphic novel, which after his lecture is actually on sale just outside the door as well. So without further ado, Maurice Vellekoop. Welcome, Maurice.
Thank you. It's a real thrill to be here tonight. I'm going to be a little repetitive here. I went to OCADU in the 1980s, back when it was called the Ontario College of Art. After 4 years of work, I got a diploma. It was decidedly not a rigorous academic environment, and I was always a little regretful I missed out on university. So it's a very big honor to be here and a little bit overwhelming. Thank you, Laurel, for the introduction, and to my friend David Fernandez for helping to arrange this evening. Just take a little sip of water here. Okay. So I'm here to talk about my graphic memoir, I'm So Glad We Had This Time Together, published last year by Pantheon Books in New York and Random House Canada. My book is about growing up in suburban Toronto, the youngest of 4 children of Dutch immigrants who came to Canada in 1950. I come from a real blue-collar family. My dad was a caretaker in the Etobicoke school system, and my mom ran her own hair salon for local ladies in the basement of our house. Think very much Queen Elizabeth II, permanent waves and sets. Despite our working class social status, my parents had a deep reverence for the arts. They loved painting and classical music, and our house was filled with books on history, biography, and culture. My mom in particular read constantly. Unlike her, I was much happier watching Carol Burnett on television than reading a book. I also loved playing with Barbie dolls and helping out in the hair salon. In short, I was super gay, which was a huge problem because my family belonged to the Christian Reformed Church, a strict Calvinist sect. When I came out to my mom in my early 20s, she couldn't accept my sexuality. And again, just a bit of repetition. After graduating from art school in '86, my career as an illustrator took off. I had a rich social life. I often went out to gay bars and clubs, but my deepest desire to find a partner eluded me. And so, despite a life filled with friendship, attending theater and opera, making and consuming art, I was caught in a spiderweb of family, faith, guilt, fraught sexuality, shaky mental health, and inherited World War II trauma. In my mid-30s, at long last, I began to untangle all of this in therapy and started out on a long-delayed search for love. So my book is a late bloomer's coming-of-age memoir. It's about a conflicted mother and son and whether they can reconcile their differences. It's also about a deep engagement with culture, both of the popular and the high varieties. But there's another level, mostly visual, that I want to talk about tonight. It's about my love-hate relationship with the city of Toronto, my hometown. A memoir is obviously concerned with memory, searching back, exploring and honoring times and spaces and places that hold meaning. You know, the kind of thing the city of Toronto is so good at and has rarely had much interest in. This town of ours seems determined not only to forget, but to destroy or consume any trace of its past. There's a maddening carelessness about preservation. We just don't value our historic sites. A lot of the things I loved most about my city are simply gone. Or what may be even worse, they're ghosts in the form of a remaining facade or an empty storefront. But cities are also necessarily about change and growth. And my book ends with a very welcome and momentous one, both for me and for Toronto. The book's cover shows me and my mom circa 1969 in our backyard at 89 Allenby Avenue in Rexdale, Etobicoke. Rexdale in the 1960s was a residential neighborhood of cookie-cutter bungalows and two-story homes for nuclear families. My mom is looking very svelte and chic in her paisley bikini after having 4 children, and I am being my little gay boy me. This back cover of the book shows our house. Our street, Allenby Avenue, ran west from Islington Avenue down to Pine Point Park in the east. It was right underneath one of the main flight paths to Pearson International Airport. It was loud. Jumbo jets roared overhead every couple of minutes. The house rattled and shook, and if we were out in the backyard on certain summer days, all conversation would have to stop while the jet passed. Our house looked out onto a field, which in turn looked out onto the 401 highway, recently expanded from 4 to 12 lanes, just before I was born in 1964. The constant roar from the highway filled in any blanks left by the jets. I think my expression kind of says it all. Visually, it was, how shall I put it, lacking. Here are some of the elements that made up the world of my childhood. The top panel shows an overpass and an off-ramp from the 401, which we used to walk underneath to visit the Pine Point Park. The middle panel shows Pine Point Arena. At least it had a little bit of mid-century architectural pizzazz. And the bottom panel shows some electrical towers that were just everywhere in the suburbs. Next is did I go too far? Next page, UGG, the uniformity of the homes. The middle panel, I was fascinated by these gas meters at school because of their Baroque complexity, like abstract sculptures, but they only stood out because of the surrounding dullness. Bottom, more express lanes and collectors from the 401. The top panel here shows Rexdale Plaza, or what remains of it visually on the internet. It was completely razed. The middle panel shows a church building rented during one of the many dogmatic rifts that subdivided our Christian community, and still do to this day. The bottom, and how could I forget, the brutalist architecture of Islington subway station. Until 1980, the end of the line. It was a place I spent a lot of time in as a non-driver. How many hours, days, weeks in total did I stand shivering in those air tunnel bus bays for all those years, waiting for the Burnhamthorpe 50? Just going to talk a little bit more about the Christian Reformed Church architecture. So, growing up in my family, we were enmeshed within the severe, strict Calvinist Christian Reformed Church. From it, I constantly got the message that there was something suspicious about pleasure. If you enjoyed something, it had to be bad for you. Only our church could have come up with the phrase, daily vacation Bible school. My family was sorry, I lost my place. My family is vegetarian. Soda pop and junk food were frowned upon. My parents rarely drank alcohol, and TV viewing was strictly limited and monitored. This asceticism, or was it Dutch cheapness, was reflected, embodied even, in Christian Reformed Church architecture. Traveling to other cities or towns, I can always spot them. Minimalist, modernist, A-line structures from the early 60s, devoid of ostentation or ornament. If there is any colored glass, it's discreet, pale green or gold, or if you're lucky, maybe royal blue. Our suburb was just depressing. My mental health, even as a child, suffered because of it. The one compensation was that with all of the motion around me, the endless stream of cars, the jets, all of it planted an idea, the idea of escape. Getting out of Rexdale was a real possibility. People were doing it all around us all the time. Okay, downtown. The visual richness I craved and was denied, decoration, patina, mystery, was only to be found elsewhere, and that place was downtown Toronto. Here's the skyline as it looked circa 1967. The TD Centre is under construction, dwarfing the Royal York Hotel, once the tallest building in the city. To construct the TD Centre, a full city block of historic buildings was demolished. These included the swanky Rawson Hotel from 1850. The Carrere and Hastings Bank at the southwest corner of King and Bay was also razed. At the time, there were protests pleading that its Beaux-Arts facade be incorporated into Mies van der Rohe's plans, but they were swept aside by the modernists in charge. Toronto proudly fell into step with the international style. I can't say I regret those lost spaces, having never experienced them. I still think the TD Centre is one of the most glamorous places in town. Anyway, at the start of this chapter, my mom is taking me on a shopping trip while my 3 older siblings are away at school. The trip downtown is always filled with anticipated pleasures. So in the 4th panel, we see the fabulous St. George's Country Club on Islington Avenue. How did a fairy tale castle wind up in Etobicoke? The biggest highlight in the bottom left was the mermaid sculpture on Islington near Bloor Street. The sculptor was one Alfio Bartoletti, a one-time Hollywood set designer. Fabulous. Then, in the subway, more stimulation. In the bottom 3 panels, I loved sitting at the front of the train and watching the brightly lit stations appear out of the soot-black tunnels. Emerging from the ozone tang of the subway and onto the corner of Queen and Yonge, we encounter the rich odor of roasting chestnuts and candy apple. There's the unfamiliar clang of the streetcars. My mother remembered that at one point, Toronto's streetcars were actually heated by coal stoves. Middle panel. Note the unusual rounded corner of the Woolworth building at the northeast corner of the intersection. As a kid, I would never have guessed that its white brick cladding completely concealed a 19th century wonder, the Jameson Building, first partially uncovered in 1985. In a rare win for historic preservation, Cadillac Fairview, the present owners, commissioned ERA architects to do a painstaking restoration of the building, returning it to all its 1895 splendor. It's of course hidden by all the hoardings for the new subway right now, but one day it will emerge. And I'll just ask you to take a look at the bottom right panel. Does anyone else remember elderly women in the 1970s still wearing turbans from the 40s? Such a practical style, especially if you haven't had your hair done in a while. My mom and I nip into the Eaton's foyer to rub the gleaming toe of the Timothy Eaton statue for good luck. This ritual has its roots in a very touching story. During World War I, Eaton's paid full salaries to all its employees serving overseas and guaranteed their employment when they returned. The statue, by Ivor Lewis of Eaton's advertising department, was a gift from Eaton's employees to Timothy Eaton's widow and son, in gratitude for the company's benevolence. Can you imagine? For many years, it presided over the statue, that is, presided over the northern entrance of the Eaton Center, and it's now on view at the ROM. The gigantic Eaton store itself, which stretched north for blocks on the other hand, was of course scrapped in the mid-70s to make way for the Eaton Center. My mom and I quickly move across the street to the hipper, more happening Simpsons, now the Hudson's Bay store. We have lunch in the glamorous panorama room in all its Doris Daisy splendor. For once, I am allowed to indulge luxuriously in longed-for delights, fish and chips, pop, Jell-O. As a 4-year-old, this to me was the height of chic sophistication. After lunch, my mom would visit the ladies' room, and you can see me in the first panel, while I gazed at the elaborate wedding cakes encased in plexiglass boxes outside of the Acadian Court, still one of the preeminent event spaces for weddings downtown. These were blissful times for me and my mom, to be alone with her in a magical suspended realm of delight, the two of us in perfect harmony, our troubles way off in the unimaginable future. Another memorable trip downtown, my dad decided for some reason to take me, and only me, none of my siblings, to a screening of the 1941 Disney film, Fantasia. Taking the highway this time, I get to see some of my favorite landmarks. The fabulous Art Deco lions by this queer sculptors Francis Loring and Francis Weil in the second panel there. They adorned the Queen Elizabeth Way monument that used to bisect the highway. They now sit in Kazimierz Zosky Park, just east of the Humber River. As we drive up Bay Street, and the third panel, middle, I spy the Greek god reliefs by sculptor Frederick Winkler that grace the exterior of the Bank of Nova Scotia at King Street. Uncannily, some of these elements seemed to appear in the film, animated. The winged horses in the Beethoven pastoral section echo the fantastical mermaid sculpture from the trip downtown with my mom. Same with the Art Deco gods that adorn the Scotiabank facade. They merged with the fantasy of the film. It became all fused in my mind with the notion of downtown Toronto as a mythical place. The effect of Fantasia on me was overwhelming. Not only the film, but the experience of seeing it in the swirly, ornamented interior of this beloved theater with its monumental facade. Trying to cement the experience of Fantasia in my memory, I tried to draw everything I could remember, from the fairies in the Nutcracker sequence to the centaurs from the Pastoral Symphony. Fantasia sparked an obsession with Disney that has lasted throughout my life. I was particularly smitten with Disney's version of the classic fairy tales, but they were difficult to access. In the days before videos and DVDs, you simply had to wait for a film to be shown on TV or be re-released in a theater. I became fixated on Disney's Sleeping Beauty in particular from 1959, but my only experience of the movie was through books and short snippets on television. Every weekend I scanned the papers, hoping for news of a theatrical re-release, but in vain. Then, in 1972, the middle two panels, I got a different taste of the story of Sleeping Beauty. I was 8 years old when CBC Television aired their film of the National Ballet's gorgeous production of Tchaikovsky's Sleeping Beauty Ballet, directed by and starring Rudolf Nureyev. It was a seminal experience in my childhood, and it sparked a love of ballet, and that would only be explored much later. And just note, this production will come back into the story later on in the talk. Meanwhile, I went back to obsessing about Disney Sleeping Beauty again, but because of my thwarted desire to experience it, I had to rely on stills from books to imagine what it might be like to watch, hoping against hope for a revival. Many years later, in 1986, at last, a screening, and at the magnificent University Theater, too. My lifelong obsession was about to be realized. I was 22 years old and had been waiting all my life. However, I was in a very dark place, cynical place at this time. I'd had a couple of bad experiences with men, followed by a brutal assault. This all happened right at the start of the AIDS epidemic. I felt afraid and overwhelmed, and I sort of shut down sexually and romantically for about 10 years or so. But seeing Sleeping Beauty on that super wide screen at the University Theater somehow revived me, and I saw a way of moving forward with art making as a path out of my loneliness and fear. The university closed for good in 1986. The theater itself was demolished, but the undulating exterior was preserved. It eventually reopened as a pottery barn, which closed in 2015, and now it's one of those ghostly facades standing empty on Mink Mile. Two of the most formative experiences I ever had, I saw in that theater. As I said, my parents were very interested in high culture. In the mid-'70s, my parents got subscriptions to the Toronto Symphony for me and my brother Dave. These were in the years of Victor Feldbrill and Andrew Davis. Going to the symphony was an iffy experience for me. If I knew the music, it was fantastic, but far more often unfamiliar music was on the program, making for a very long evening. Eventually, my parents stopped taking us. I did love everything about Massey Hall, though: the fire engine red doors, the soaring Moorish revival architecture, and the famously warm acoustic. Despite my childhood ambivalence, a visit to Massey Hall nowadays is an intensely nostalgic experience. Bravo, Toronto, for respectfully modernizing this beloved institution. And then in the bottom panel, to the right, where you can see me and some of my family at the AGO. My dad often took me and another sibling to the AGO in those days too. These visits followed a set routine. Me and my sister would wander off through the stately Beaux-Arts-style rooms, eventually wondering what happened to Dad. Retracing our steps, we'd find him back in the very first room. There he would be, still looking at the same picture we'd left him in front of a half an hour earlier, completely transfixed, absorbed in the magic of the old masters. Later on, as a teenager, the focus of going downtown became about personal shopping. One of my brothers and I would get off at Yonge and Bloor, first stop Britnell's bookshop. I still miss this place with an almost physical ache, like a veteran feeling sensation in a missing limb. I have a mental picture of the staff, women in long flowing skirts, glasses on a chain, pencils poked into upswept masses of hair. A friend of mine recalled working there in the 1970s. It was her first job. She recalls Mr. Britnell addressing the troops each morning, impeccably dressed, with spats on his shoes. When the Rosedale matrons arrived, they would leave their chauffeur-driven cars idling on Yonge Street. They'd pop in to pick up the latest Robertson Davies. And according to my friend, Mr. Britnell always kept a blank checkbook at the cash in case they forgot their wallet. How great. Dear Britnells, it was sad enough when it was a Starbucks. Now it is sitting empty, another ghost. It was a Starbucks for a while, yeah. So then our next stop after Britnell's was W.H. Smith, where I would pick up the latest issue of Andy Warhol's Interview. Then we'd make our way down Yonge Street, hitting all the big indie record shops along the way, eventually winding up at the big record stores near Dundas, Sam's and A&A, record cathedrals. Such riches in those huge spaces. A&A went bankrupt in 1993. Sam's hung on as late as 2007, but the building was demolished between 2009 and 2011. I still miss Sam's. I vividly remember one of the cashiers, this very regal South Asian lady who had a thing for the gay boys who were into classical music. I would linger in the lineup till her checkout was free. She would glance around for a supervisor, and if the coast was clear, she would give me a huge discount on expensive opera CD sets with a conspiratorial smile. Reactor. In 1986, after graduating from art school, I joined Reactor Art and Design, an agency for illustrators, and as well as a graphic design firm. It was founded by Bill Grigsby and Louis Fishoff. The space itself was one of those old sweatshops in the garment district. In the bottom right panel, you see me approaching the building at 51 Camden Street. It was west of Spadina between Richmond and Adelaide. It had soaring windows and ceilings, hardwood floors, and radiator heating. Bill and Louis shared the building with Lunar Caustic Press, which did very inventive, high-quality letterpress printing. Lunar Caustic's clients included some of the big Soho galleries. I still remember those monster 1940s printing presses wheezing and gasping at their work. Reactor in the 1980s and 90s was booming. The roster of illustrators was stellar and international, and the award-winning design business included a line of t-shirts and fabulous top-quality carpets by artists. There were regular shows in the gallery. I was part of many group shows there, and I had a series of solo shows myself, and they often sold out. The parties were legendary. Reactor was much more than a business. It was really a second home, and the people became my family. So this scene shows me arriving for my very first appointment in 1986 with Bill Grigsby, and he's looking through my portfolio, and he offers to represent me, the handshake at the bottom of this page. As the years went by and times changed, Reactor gradually shrank in size and scope. Bill and Louis amicably split up. Bill and his new partner, Steve Dunk, left Camden Street in 2014. That fabulous utilitarian building was demolished and replaced by the Ace Hotel in 2022. A Google search of the address yields no other information than the hotel. So many memories of personal and professional triumph for so many of us in that space, in the worlds of magazine and book publishing, advertising, and graphic design. There needs to be a plaque. Young Sing Pastry Shop. The top panel of this page depicts the Young Sing Pastry Shop on Baldwin Street. I'm lunching here in this scene with my friend Deirdre from art school. When Young Sing closed in 2009, it was like getting stabbed in the stomach. Almost worse was the sign on the window promising to reopen the following summer. Summers came and went, no more Young Sing. Starting in the 70s, all through art school, and for years after, no trip downtown was complete for me without stopping at this iconic place. The pork buns, the curry beef buns, the spring rolls. Pure heaven. If you were lucky, you'd reach the head of the line in time to see the wizened old cooks pass the fresh buns on giant trays up through a hole in the basement. Over the years, I watched at least one generation grow up from young children to teens to young adults, eventually becoming managers. After they closed, I would haunt Baldwin Street forlorn, hoping in vain that they would reopen. Young saying many thanks for all the sweat and hard work that your incredible family did for the pleasure they provided for so many. That suspicious word. Larry's Hideaway. Legendary performance space Larry's Hideaway was originally the restaurant in the Prince Carlton Hotel. In 1971, the two Garys, the famous Toronto music producers, booked the room as a music venue. Everyone from Teenage Head to Rush to the Tragically Hip played there. REM even recorded a live album in the famously filthy room. A friend joked you could get an STD just from sitting at a stool at the bar. I started going there in the 80s, the middle two panels, because I'd fallen hopelessly in love with the straight drummer in a punk band called the Polkaholics. The Polkaholics played and toured with queercore legends Fifth Column, an all-lesbian punk band. I feel so lucky to have been at some of those legendary shows. And Wikipedia tells me the bar closed in the summer of 1986, but the hotel remained open and was the site of several robberies and sexual assaults. In September 1986, the hotel was raided by the police. They arrested 26 people and seized thousands of dollars of stolen goods and drugs. The hotel was sold in 1988 and closed. It was boarded up and left vacant, sometimes used by squatters and vagrants. On October 16, 1991, a 3-alarm fire destroyed much of the hotel. The city bought it back in 1990 to increase the size of Allen Gardens. The location is now the off-leash dog area in the park. Needless to say, there is no plaque, not even by the dog poop bin. Toronto's Rep Cinemas, so if you look at the bottom left panel, that's the good old Kingsway Theatre. Toronto's Rep Cinemas were like a second home for me and my sister Ingrid. She educated me on classic Hollywood and world cinema. We went to screenings 3 or 4 times a week. I was so obsessed, I took the very first cab ride of my life to the nostalgic theater above the Kingsway because I didn't want to be late for a rare screening of Hedy Lamarr in Ecstasy. And there was a nude scene too, pretty risky. And I made lifelong friendships with the super cool members, the super cool staff at the Bloor Cinema, another home away from home, community center for outsider youth. I'm really happy to see the Kingsway is still a film theater. The Bloor has been home to the Hot Docs Theater since 2012. Last year, Hot Docs announced they would close for 3 months due to financial pressure, resulting in part from the pandemic. They have since reopened, thank God, and they have a full schedule of events. Toronto Island. I moved to Toronto Island in 1991. I bought the house with my friend Paul Baker, an older gay man who is a professor at OCA. He's a central character in my book. He was a passionate consumer of culture. He was a hilarious mimic, a passionate devotee of literature and film. He turned me on to so many things, including opera. And in the bottom panel, he's arriving at the house in a state. He was a rather volatile figure. At 27, I had saved enough money from doing illustrations for magazines to be able to pay half the price up front for this former summer cottage. When Paul and I bought, legislation had just been announced that would lead to the 99-year leases that we Islanders now signed and own, and the city recognizes that we do legally own our houses. But as of then, in 1991, there was a very real risk that islanders could still be evicted, which they had been in the 1950s. Paul and I had very different ideas on our island home. I lived there permanently while he split his time between the island and the house he shared with his longtime partner, Martin, in Riverdale. There was friction between us. Eventually, he agreed to sell me his half, and we were much better friends after that. My early years on the island were challenging, mostly because of insufficient heat and some very patchy skirting around the crawl space. Pipes froze, often. It was so cold, I used to put socks and shoes on the bed at night and put them on before even setting foot on the floor. There were a couple of electric space heaters and a gas wall unit heater. And when I was working, I'd put the shoes on top of the wall unit to heat them, wear them for a while, then put them back on the heater. They ended up looking like the curled up boots of the Wicked Witch of the East when Dorothy gets the ruby slippers. The island, okay, and you can see me, putting the pants on before getting out of bed and going to the kitchen in the last panel to find that there's no water coming out of the tap. The island has been my rock and foundation for over 30 years. Through some uppity ups and downy downs, I feel so fortunate to be able to live in this unique community of big-hearted artists, kooks, and eccentrics for all this time, a community that remembers and cherishes its past for the sake of its survival. More island stuff. Sorry, getting a little backward here. Dance floors and gay bars. Of all the beloved spaces in our city, bars and clubs are the most ephemeral. These places are by nature bound to morph, move, and close, even more than restaurants, thus becoming spaces that exist entirely in memory. Here's a scene from around 1985. I started going to nightclubs with my punk, goth, new wave friends from the Bloor Cinema. We went to clubs like Nuts and Bolts, Backstreet, and Domino, which is shown here at its second incarnation at 279 Yonge Street, across from the Eaton Center. But oh, the gay bars of my young adulthood. Each name evokes a specific mood and type, as we see from these collection of matchbooks in the top corner. Twilight Zone was the most stylish and chic club where black and white folks mingled to hear punk, ska, and new wave music. The Chez Moi was a working class lesbian bar back in the days when the butch femme division was very clearly marked. There were fights. I loved it for the fantastic DJs. Colby's and Boots were for the blue-collar gays. Think Chaka Khan and Janet Jackson blaring over the dance floor. Chaps was strictly for the clones, the mustache and polo shirt crowd. Comrades, shown here on the bottom, was for a more arty, bohemian, alternative type of guy. How many times did the Smiths song, How Soon Is Now, cast its wistful spell over our heads on that stainless steel dance floor? Inevitably, members of all these groups ended up at the barn. It was the reliable and seemingly everlasting dive where everyone of every clique went to dance and hook up after hours. The barn was the first gay bar I ever went to, right at the beginning of the AIDS era. In my depiction on the top panel, I especially wanted to honor the fan dancers, gay men who twirled giant fans in elaborate choreographies, practiced to perfection in a mirror at home. Holdouts from the dying days of disco, they were soon to die out themselves because of the disease. This scene takes place in the early 80s. This next scene shows me at the barn, again, about 15 years later. The barn closed its doors for good in 2012, in part because the space needed extensive renovations. But I also suspect, because I remember on a busy night, the dance floor bouncing alarmingly, that it's a miracle that thing held up as long as it did. So perhaps in this case, closure really was for the best. The building still stands empty today. And here I just have to give a shout out to the great DJ and Toronto treasure and journalist Denise Benson for her blog and book, which are titled then and now Toronto nightlife history. It's because of her painstaking research and writing that I got so much of my visual reference for these last few pages. Oh, there's leaving the barn. Sorry. Toronto's changing skyline. Here's the skyline again, circa 2002. It's hard to superimpose this image with the view we saw from 1967, or to compare it to today, totally unrecognizable. At this point, we're near the end of the book. I'm again at another low point personally, in fact, my lowest. I've had my most serious depression that I've had in my life, and I've started taking antidepressants for the first time. I'm gearing up to face the central problem of my life with my therapist. Once that gets resolved, spoiler alert, I will finally emerge from many years of loneliness and depression and at last meet and fall in love with my charming prince. And we'll get to that very soon. But first, I couldn't do this talk without mentioning Markham Street. Many of you, I'm sure, have fond memories of Markham in the days of the beguiling bookstore, Southern Accent, the children's bookstore, and of course, David Mirvish Books on Art. I've shown it here circa 1982. Note the on-trend shoulder pads of the lady customer in the illustration. In 1982, I was a closeted gay boy. I visited often, officially to see all the new art books, but my real motive was to pore over 2 gorgeous volumes of homoerotic photography by George Platlines, published by 12 Trees Press. It was an exciting day when, a year or two later, not only had I saved up the money to purchase the books, I had found the nerve to proudly bring them to the cashier to buy them. George Platlines is still one of my favorite queer all-time gods. So we're getting there. Here's me and Paul Baker at the Hummingbird Center in the late 90s. We're attending a performance of the Canadian Opera Company. Once known as the O'Keeffe Center, it was the home of the COC from 1961 to 2006. Ever since my first visit in 1982 to see the Magic Flute, with sets and costumes by my idol, Maurice Vellekoop, I have loved this great theater, which is still thriving, thankfully. I especially loved the huge, incredibly dated mural by York Wilson in the foyer. You can see a little bit of it in the second panel behind Paul. But the O'Keeffe Center was never quite the right fit for the COC. Paul nicknamed it the OK Corral for its barn-like size. He always yearned for a dedicated opera house so that Toronto could finally stand with other serious cities. Four Seasons Center. Paul and all the other ballet and opera lovers of Toronto would have their hopes for a dedicated opera ballet house raised and dashed for decades. Site after site, plan after plan was announced, only to fall apart time and time again. At last, the Four Seasons Center was announced in the early 2000s. This time, it seemed as though it really was going to happen. Paul bought a condo at Queen and Beverly, in part to be close to the proposed site at Queen and University. Sadly, Paul passed away suddenly in July 2001, a few days before his 56th birthday. So the opening of the theater a few years later was an incredibly poignant moment for me personally. So to close this speech, I'll just read the ending of the book. Here's the setup. It's 2006. My dad has Alzheimer's and is living in a nursing home in Etobicoke. My mom, Anne, has very reluctantly agreed to move to an assisted living apartment at Holland Christian Homes in Brampton, run by her church. The house is up for sale. I've been helping to pack with my Aunt Alice. I'm on my way downtown to meet my partner Gordon, who I'm still with today. And I'm taking the same trip downtown from my parents' place that I took at the beginning of the book. So I'll just read the ending from here on in. Alice has been heroic, persuading my mom to accept this most unwelcome change. Thanks again for all your help. Say hi to Gordon. This is possibly the last time I will ever take the Burnhamthorpe bus downtown. Gordon and I have tickets to opening night of the National Ballet season. After decades of abandoned plans and dashed hopes, the National finally has a permanent home, the Four Seasons Centre. Like me, Toronto has at last grown up, and the ballet is none other than the expensively refurbished first-time revival of the 1972 Sleeping Beauty by Rudolf Nureyev. Paul would have loved this. When he died, the Opera Ballet House had only just been announced. Had he lived, we would certainly have met up for a celebratory drink. I meet Gordon and we kiss. Gordon says, "How did it go today at Anne's?" "Good, we did a lot. Alice is a trooper. She's a sweetie." "So, excited?" "Like a little kid." My boyfriend Gordon and I have been together for 4, sometimes rocky, always amazing years now. I went off Effexor soon after we started dating and have not experienced a prolonged period of depression since. My family has fully welcomed and embraced Gordon. My mother has even said she thinks of him as a son. And as for me, I'm simply in awe.
Thank you so much, Maurice.
Oh, my pleasure. Yeah.
Would you be willing to?
Oh, of course, yes, some questions.
Do
Yeah.
we have questions? Oh, yeah.
Where was the barn?
The barn is was on Church Street, just south of Carlton. Does anyone know the cross street? Granby Street. Yeah. Northwest corner. Yeah. Or southwest corner. Southwest corner. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
It was fun there.
Yes.
Where was your house on the island? Which island?
I live on Wards Island, still to this day. Yeah. Yeah.
We used to have a summer one on Hamlin's Point.
Oh, wonderful. Amazing. Huh.
Other questions?
I have a question for you, Maurice. Where did you get? Where did you access materials or sources for the historical images?
Yeah, well, Blog.to is a wonderful source. It has a lot of historical photos of Toronto, and the Toronto Archives, of course. So for things like TTC buses in the 1960s. Also, memory came into play. I could remember there was this, because I spent so much time on the buses and the subways, I can distinctly remember the formica that used to line the seats that had little like stars and glitter on it. So that just came. Some of it just came back to me, and then I really have to say Google Street View was my best friend during the making of this whole book, because it's so incredible, because you can find a building and you can see it from any angle. So it's you just have instant reference at the click of a button.
Thank you. That was really, really great to hear.
Oh, thank you.
So what's next? This is your first real foray into a graphic memoir. I mean, I've seen your opera one, which is really fun. But what are you thinking?
Yeah. So of course I have moved on to other things. The book came out a year ago, so that even before that time there was a long period where it was off at getting printed and stuff. So I decided that I would want, my next 2 projects would be a children's book and a book of erotic drawings. The children's book has been almost universally rejected by publishers. So I'm working on the erotic drawings, and it's a narrative, and that'll be a book too. And I'm also thinking about a next graphic novel, which will be fiction, and I'll just say it's going to take a look at possibly, I haven't I'm still thinking about it and making notes and stuff, but I think it's going to be a historic book about a trans or non-binary person before we had that terminology. Yeah.
Hi. I wondered, I can't remember if you said, how long did you have to work at this book, putting this together?
Yeah, so 11 years in total. So I submitted a proposal to Pantheon Books, and I knew someone there, a graphic designer named Chip Kidd, who's also an editor, and he sort of pounced on it and said, "Yes, this is for us." And then I got my first Canada Council grant soon after that, so I was set to work on it for a while. And I know you're supposed to thank the Canada Council at all times, but I really, really do thank them, because the money just gave me the luxury of time to create this work without having to worry about money. And the Ontario Arts Council as well, I got a grant from them as well. So yeah, and then so during those years, I also worked on other projects. So I had Criterion, the DVD classic movies company. I did a few DVD boxes for them, and I also worked. I took about 6 or 8 months off to work on an animated, some animation for a feature documentary. So it wasn't the book all the time, but most of the time for those 11 years, it was working on it. Yeah. Yes.
Can you tell us a little more about the technique that you use to create these illustrations?
Sure. Yeah. So I am very old-fashioned. I've never learned Photoshop. So everything that you see are watercolor paintings on paper, and the only thing that's digital about it is the text. So we created a font using my handwritten lettering. And all of that type was loaded in by a succession of interns at Reactor Art and Design over the years who came and went. And I should really thank them too, because that was a lot of work. We haven't really named it. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, yeah.
Thank
Yeah, hi.
you so much for the talk. I was wondering if, like, the walk through memory lane has changed your perspective on Toronto or your relationship with the city. You find that it's different now that you've done all this work with it?
It's still complicated. Those ghost buildings do really irk me still, walking by, the building, especially when they remain empty. Like, at least when Britnell's was a Starbucks, people could walk into it and get some little sense of what it was like. But just sitting there empty is just tragic, And then there's also the thing of that I actually don't use the city that much at this stage. Like, I'm a bit housebound, and so I do really appreciate living on the island and having the luxury of living in a park and having that around me. It's just been incredible. But yeah, I actually don't feel like I know the city that well anymore. Yeah.
Does heat now?
Pardon me? Yes, it does. Yeah. All fixed up good. Thanks. Yeah. Yes. Oh.
No, I just wanted to say we seem to have probably crossed paths at some point, because Reactor had the greatest parties and made best T-shirts, and the Twilight Zone should have a plaque at 185.
Mm.
That
Yes.
was the greatest club in the world.
It was, wasn't it?
But I wanted to mention a friend of mine who probably, you might even know her. She comes from the same background as yourself. And she always described her mother, a Dutch-Canadian woman, by saying, wooden shoes, wooden heart, wouldn't listen.
I can't top that.
I think related to that, Maurice, though, I've wondered, obviously your mother and your siblings have seen this. What has their reaction been?
Yeah.
Telling us?
Sure. Yeah, so my mother passed away in 2021. during the pandemic, and she didn't have dementia, but she wasn't quite all there either. And she was bedridden for the last few years of her life, and so very diminished. And she was really dreading the book because she was a very private, nice Christian lady, and the book reveals a lot of stuff about her. The central conflict is with her. So she was not looking forward to the book being published. And so in a way, maybe it's better that it did come out after she passed away. And I will say that my mother was not a hard-hearted person. She was very loving, but it was the queer stuff was very hard for her. But she was always there and ready to talk to me and give me information about her very personal stuff that I wanted to know about for the book. So I asked her about her sex life, and she told me. And so I'm very grateful to her for so generously supporting the project when she was not happy, clearly not happy about it. And yeah, and my dad passed away in 2006, and he had Alzheimer's, so that was before it even began. And my siblings are mostly fine with it. My sister was quite unhappy with her portrayal. So last year was a year of a lot of mending fences, and I'm happy to say that we're good friends again. Yeah.
Other questions?
It won't be an obscure question to you, nor to me, but to others it might be. What was it like when you actually saw the Sleeping Beauty film? Because it has one of the best opening sequences, those three-dimensional almost. You must have been beside yourself when you actually did see it.
Yeah, well, that's like the whole Sleeping Beauty thing is central to the book because it's about longing, right? It's about longing for something that you can't have, and it touches on my dad, who was very absent and very volatile and rough with us, like verbally, not physically, but verbally. So there's this sense of longing for all kinds of things that runs through the book, and Sleeping Beauty, the film, is kind of an emblem of that. And yeah, so when I finally saw it in the early 80s, I had never realized that it was actually in widescreen, because every still that I had ever seen was like a square. So that was the first thing that blew my mind, was that it's like in that super wide late 50s, 60s ratio. So yeah, and then it's just the colors and it's so psychedelic too. Yeah, it was just and as I said in the outline, that it did really raise me up again and think, yeah, I want to be an artist, and that's what's going to save me, Yeah.
Is there any other questions? Well, thank you so much, Maurice. That was fabulous.
Okay, thank you. Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.